You remember the feeling. The last hour of driving. The kids asleep in the back. The highway narrowing into a main street through a town you had not planned to stop in. And then coming around a curve or over a rise, the sign. Vacancy. A swimming pool visible from the road. A row of identical doors facing the parking lot. A small office with a light on. You pulled in. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and window unit air conditioning. There was a television bolted to the dresser. The ice machine was at the far end of the building. The key was on a plastic fob, the size of a playing card. It was exactly what you needed. The motel is one of the most distinctly American inventions in the history of travel. Not just as a building type, though it is that, but as an idea. The idea that a traveler arriving by car deserves accommodation that has been designed around the car. Park directly outside the room. Walk straight in. Leave when you want. Deal with exactly one person at check-in, and owe nobody a tip. That idea has a specific origin, a specific date, a specific building on a California highway in 1925, designed by a Los Angeles architect who also invented the word and who tried to trademark it and failed and watched his word spread across the country without compensation, and whose building nonetheless still stands today. Within 30 years of his word being coined, there were 61,000 motels in the United States. Here is how that happened. Arthur Heineman named a thing that was already forming along the American road. What grew from that name, the neon signs, the swimming pools, the franchise wars, the interstate that rerouted everything, and the particular quality of a road trip decision made at 55 miles per hour is one of the genuinely unexpected stories in the history of American daily life. Chapter 1. When the road had nowhere to sleep. Before the automobile, the question of where to spend the night while traveling had a clear answer. A hotel. Hotels existed in cities and in towns large enough to justify them. They were designed around the railroad, located near the station, staffed by porters who handled luggage, organized around a lobby where arrivals were observed and recorded. The hotel assumed a specific kind of traveler, one who arrived with bags that required carrying, who wanted a dining room, who was staying in a city for a reason. The automobile traveler was a different creature entirely. He, and in the early years of motor travel, it was usually he arrived by his own power at a time of his own choosing, carrying his own luggage, wanting nothing except a place to stop. He might arrive at 10 in the evening after a long day on roads that were, in many cases, not much better than packed dirt. He was tired, he was hungry, he needed a room. What he found, if he was lucky, was a hotel in the nearest town that had not expected him and was not particularly glad he had arrived. What he found more often, in the early years of the 1910s and 1920s, was improvisation. The autocamp was the first improvised solution. Towns and private operators along popular motor routes established simple stopping areas where travelers could pitch tents, park overnight, and use basic facilities, water, outhouses, sometimes a communal kitchen. These camps were free or nearly free. They were not comfortable by any conventional hotel standard. But they were there, and they were designed for a traveler who arrived by car. Through the 1920s, the autocamp evolved. Some operators began offering small wooden cabins as an upgrade from tent camping. A cluster of cabins around a central driveway where a guest could park directly adjacent to their accommodation and walk straight to their door became what the industry called a tourist court. By the early 1930s, tourist courts were a recognized feature of American highway travel. They were not yet unified by a name, a standard, or a design language. They were simply what had grown along the road because the road had needed them. One person looked at this unorganized, unnamed phenomenon and decided to give it a form. The tourist court already embodied the core logic of what would become the motel. Drive to the door, stay in a small private space, leave on your own schedule. What it did not have was a name, and without a name, it could not become a product. A Los Angeles architect was about to fix that on the California highway between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Chapter 2. The word Arthur Heineman invented. Arthur Heineman was born in 1878 and worked as an architect in Los Angeles. In the early 1920s, he was watching the same thing every observant person in California was watching. The automobile was changing how people moved, and the road was not keeping up. The highway between Los Angeles and San Francisco, El Camino Real, later designated U.S. Highway 101, was one of the most traveled motor routes in the country, and the travelers on it had nowhere adequate to stop. Heineman designed a solution, not a hotel scaled down, and not a camping area dressed up. Something new, a set of Spanish mission-style bungalows, each with its own garage attached, arranged so that a guest drove directly to their unit. No lobby to enter, no porter to summon, no luggage to carry across a parking lot. The car and the room were one integrated unit. He needed a name for it. He combined motor and hotel, Motel. He put a hyphen in it because he was filing for a trademark and wanted the compound to be legally distinct. On the 12th of December, 1925, the Milestone Mo-Tel opened on the Camino Real in San Luis Obispo, California. It was the first property ever to use the word. The trademark failed. Not immediately, but quickly enough. Other motor accommodations across the country began calling themselves motels within a few years, without Heineman's permission, without a license, without any payment. The word had entered common usage before any legal mechanism could contain it. Heineman had invented a word that would be used in over 100 languages. He would not profit from this in any significant way. The building, however, still stands. At 2223 Monterey Street in San Luis Obispo, the structure Heineman built in 1925 has been through various ownerships and renovations, but remains in operation as a motel today. Guests can stay in the building where the word was coined. Most of them have no idea. Chapter 3. 13,000 tourist courts and a road called 66. The word spread faster than the buildings could keep up. Through the late 1920s and into the 1930s, motor accommodations multiplied along the U.S. highway network. The numbered highway system, formalized by the Federal Highway Act of 1921, created the physical corridors along which the motel culture would grow. Route 66, established in 1926, running from Chicago to Los Angeles through 8 states, became the primary artery. What grew along Route 66 and the other U.S. highways was not uniform. Some tourist courts were clean, well-run family businesses where proprietors took genuine pride in their properties. Others were rough, poorly maintained, and best avoided. The traveler had no way to know which was which until he pulled in. This uncertainty, the decision made based on a glimpse of a sign and the look of the parking lot, was part of the texture of early motor travel. Sometimes you got lucky, sometimes you didn't. By 1939, there were approximately 13,000 tourist courts and motor accommodations in the United States. John Steinbeck drove Route 66 that same year researching The Grapes of Wrath, and his novel captured the motor court experience as it served not just leisure travelers, but the economic migrants moving westward during the Depression. Families in overloaded cars with nowhere permanent to stop. The motor court, their brief shelter between stretches of road. The motel served everyone who was on the road, but it did not serve everyone equally. The Negro Motorist Green Book, published annually from 1936 to 1966 by Victor Hugo Green, existed because the road was not equally free for all Americans. Many tourist courts and motels were segregated white travelers only, by policy and by practice. The mythology of the American road trip as freedom and democracy was real for some travelers and unavailable to others. The Green Book guided black travelers to the establishments that would actually serve them in a country where finding a safe place to stop was not simply a matter of watching for a vacancy sign. The motel's golden era, which the nostalgia around it tends to celebrate as universal, was a segregated era. Both things were true. And the freedom of the road, which the motel made possible for millions of Americans, was hedged and limited for millions more. By 1939, there were 13,000 motor courts. By 1958, there would be 61,000 motels. Something had to happen in the years between to produce that growth. What happened was the post-war economic boom, the GI Bill, the rise of the family vacation, and the discovery that a station wagon full of children could travel cross-country for less than it cost to take the train. Chapter 4. The Post-War Family Vacation. Between 1940 and 1950, the number of registered vehicles in the United States grew from 27 million to 49 million. By 1960, the number would reach 74 million. The suburban housing that the GI Bill financed came with driveways, and the driveways came with cars, and the cars produced a new American institution, the family road trip. The economics were straightforward. Driving a family of 4 from Chicago to Florida cost less than putting 4 people on a train, and staying in a motel, even a decent one, cost considerably less than a downtown hotel. The combination of the car, the highway, and the motel made leisure travel accessible to families who could not have afforded it in any previous era. The motel offered something the hotel could not. It asked nothing of you socially. There was no lobby to cross in travel-worn clothes, no doorman assessing your luggage, no bellhop to tip, no maitre d' to navigate. You drove to a door, you paid for a room, you carried your own bags inside, and nobody watched you do it. For a family managing a careful budget, the elimination of the tipping culture was not a small thing. It was the difference between relaxed travel and anxious calculation at every interaction. The motel room of the early 1950s was modest, usually 2 beds, a small bathroom, a window unit air conditioner if the property was well maintained. A television was still an emerging feature. The room opened directly to the parking lot through a single exterior door, and the car was visible through the window. Simple, functional, exactly sufficient. Families loaded their station wagons and drove. The motel was the overnight stop, the swimming pool, the afternoon reward, the restaurant sign at the next interchange, the evening's navigation question. The road trip had found its infrastructure. And in Memphis, Tennessee, in 1951, a home builder named Kemmons Wilson took a family vacation that frustrated him in specific and documented ways and decided to fix everything that was wrong with it. Before Kemmons Wilson changes the motel forever, if you have been on a road trip that included a motel stay, this next part is going to explain exactly why it looked the way it did. Subscribe so you catch every episode, and we will see you in a minute. Chapter 5. The Trip That Built Holiday Inn. Kemmons Wilson was a Memphis home builder. In 1951, he loaded his family into the car and drove from Memphis to Washington, D.C. He kept notes. The rooms were small. The rooms were sometimes dirty. Most properties charged extra for children. A family of 5 paid more than a couple. There were no swimming pools. The prices were unpredictable. The same basic accommodation cost different amounts at different properties, with no logic he could determine. And perhaps most frustrating, there was no way to know, before you stopped and committed to the night, whether a given motel was any of these things or all of them. Wilson was a builder. He looked at problems as collections of specific failures with specific solutions. Small rooms. Set a minimum size and build to it. Extra charges for children. Eliminate them policy-wide. No pools. Build one at every location. Unpredictable prices. Display them on the sign before the traveler turns in. Inconsistent quality. Solve it through standardization, enforced by a franchise system that required every operator to meet the same specifications. On the 1st of August, 1952, the first Holiday Inn opened on Summer Avenue in Memphis, Tennessee. 4 buildings, 120 rooms, a swimming pool, air conditioning in every room, television in every room. Children stayed free. The room rate was posted on the sign outside. Wilson had not invented the motel. He had identified every complaint a typical traveler had about motels in 1951 and designed a product that addressed each complaint individually. That is a different kind of invention and arguably a more commercially significant one. Wilson's insight was not architectural, it was commercial. He understood that the motel's central weakness, the anxiety of not knowing what you were getting before you stopped, could be solved by branding. If the sign was recognizable, the room behind the sign could be predictable. And if the product was predictable, travelers would stop specifically for it rather than stopping for whoever happened to have a vacancy. Chapter 6. The Great Sign and the Franchise. The Holiday Inn Great Sign was not designed to be beautiful. It was designed to be read. Kemmons Wilson worked with a sign designer to ensure the Holiday Inn sign could be recognized and processed by a driver at 55 miles per hour before the decision point arrived. The specific typography, the green and yellow color scheme, the size and height, all of it was calibrated for roadside legibility at driving speed. The starburst shape that became the sign's most recognizable feature was specifically chosen to catch peripheral vision. Holiday Inn was among the first hospitality companies to approach sign design as an engineering problem rather than an aesthetic one. The franchise system made the sign meaningful. Wilson sold franchises to owner-operators who built to Holiday Inn specifications. The room dimensions, the pool requirements, the sign design, the amenity standards, all of it contractually enforced. A traveler who stopped at a Holiday Inn in Miami was contractually guaranteed to find the same room size, the same air conditioning, and the same free children policy that they had found at the Holiday Inn in Memphis. Other chains were forming and expanding simultaneously. Ramada Inn, founded in 1954, Howard Johnson's Motor Lodges, which brought the Howard Johnson's restaurant brand into lodging. Best Western, which had operated since 1946 as a referral network of independent properties sharing a common name and basic quality standard. Travelodge. The landscape of Motel America was shifting from thousands of individual owner-operated properties to a more structured, competitive environment dominated by recognizable brands. At the 1,958 peak, there were approximately 61,000 motels in the United States, employing approximately 850,000 people. Holiday Inn alone had hundreds of locations and was expanding at a pace that would make it the largest hotel chain in the world by 1972. The independent motel operator, who had built the industry, now faced a structural challenge that the neon of his individual sign could not fully address. The traveler stopping for a Holiday Inn was not stopping for him, they were stopping for the sign. Chapter 7. The interstate takes the travelers away. In 1956, the Federal Aid Highway Act authorized the Interstate Highway System. If you watched our episode about that, you know the story. 41,000 miles of limited access highway, financed through the Highway Trust Fund, routed through cities and across the country at a speed and standard that the old U.S. highway network could not match. For the motel industry, the interstate was simultaneously a long-term benefit and an immediate threat, depending on whether your property sat on the new system's corridors or on the old ones it was replacing. The properties at interstate interchanges thrived. Clean, well-located, accessible from the limited access road, they served a new generation of travelers moving faster and covering more miles per day than the U.S. highway traveler ever had. Chains built aggressively at interstate exits through the 1960s and 1970s. The properties along the bypassed U.S. highway corridors faced a different future. Route 66 is the most documented example. As I-40 construction proceeded parallel to the old road through the 1960s and into the 1970s, section by section of Route 66 was decommissioned, bypassed by the interstate, no longer maintained as a federal highway, effectively removed from the national road network. Motels that had been built on the route over 30 years of traffic watched that traffic diminish and then disappear. Some owners relocated to the new interstate exits. Some held on hoping the travelers would return. Some closed. The Wigwam Motel in Holbrook, Arizona, teepee-shaped units that had attracted Route 66 travelers since the 1950s, that had been built on the basic premise that a building shaped like something unusual would catch the eye of a passing driver, watched the passing drivers move to I-40. The wigwam survived, eventually, by becoming something slightly different. Not a motel that attracted travelers passing through, but a destination that attracted travelers specifically seeking it. That shift from functional lodging to nostalgic destination would define the surviving independent motel's future relationship with its own past. The interstate did not kill the motel. It relocated the motel to its exits, replaced the individual sign with the chain flag, and turned the bypassed highways into museums of their own former selves. What was lost was not lodging. It was a particular kind of encounter with the road. Chapter 8. The chains win. Through the 1960s and 1970s, the structural advantages of motel chains over independent operators compounded with each passing year. A chain property had a national reservation system you could call ahead and book a room in a city you had not yet reached. An independent property could not offer this unless it joined a referral network like Best Western. A chain property had national advertising and a recognizable brand that travelers would seek out. An independent property had its sign and its reputation among people who had stopped there before. A chain property had a quality standard enforced by contract. An independent property had whatever standard its owner maintained. These advantages were not decisive for experienced road travelers who had their own networks of trusted stops, but for first-time travelers, for travelers in unfamiliar regions, for travelers who had children to manage and limited patience for uncertainty, the chain's guarantee was worth something the individual sign could not offer. The limited service hotel brands that emerged in the 1980s intensified the competitive pressure. Hampton Inn, founded in 1984. Fairfield Inn by Marriott, founded in 1987. Courtyard by Marriott, founded in 1983. These properties occupied the same interstate exchange locations as motels, offered consistent quality at moderate prices, and were backed by reservation systems, loyalty programs, and national advertising that most independent motel operators could not begin to match. Airline deregulation in 1978 added another force. When flying became cost competitive with driving for long trips, the family that had been a motel customer for 6 nights on a cross-country drive was now a motel customer for 0 nights. They flew. They rented a car. They stayed in a hotel near the airport. The motels that remained were the ones at the interstate exchanges, under chain flags, offering a predictable product that travelers had learned to expect. The motels that had defined the industry's golden era individual, named, signed in neon, operated by a family who lived on the premises, were closing or converting or becoming something else. Chapter 9. What the motel left behind. Route 66 was officially decommissioned in 1985. The highway that had been the primary artery of American motor travel for nearly 60 years was removed from the federal highway system. It did not disappear. The roads were still there. The towns were still there. The motels that had survived were still there. But their function had changed. They were no longer on the way to somewhere. They were the destination. The surviving independent motels along Route 66 and other historic highway corridors operate today as what the industry calls nostalgia tourism. Travelers who seek them out specifically because of what they represent rather than because of where they are located along a travel route. The wigwam motels charge a premium for the experience of sleeping in a teepee-shaped unit that represents the programmatic architecture of the motel-era buildings, designed to catch a driver's eye in the second before they passed, built in shapes that announced themselves from a quarter-mile away. The original Milestone Mo-Tel building in San Luis Obispo still operates. The specific bungalow structure that Arthur Heineman built in 1925, in which the word motel was first used to describe a working property, accepts guests. The building has been through multiple ownerships and various degrees of renovation. It is a registered historic landmark. It is also simply a motel, doing what it has always done, which is providing a room to a traveler who needs one. The neon sign has become a collected artifact. The specific visual vocabulary of the motel era, the vacancy lettering, the swimming pool silhouette, the arrow pointing to the office, The NO in no vacancy, rendered in a different color, is preserved in photography, in museum collections, and in the aesthetic preferences of designers who grew up seeing it along American roads. The Society for Commercial Archaeology and similar organizations have documented the surviving examples. Entire books of motel sign photography exist. The sign that was designed to be read at 55 miles per hour is now studied at a standing stop. And then there is the word itself. One word that Arthur Heineman coined in 1925, could not trademark, and did not profit from. A portmanteau that escaped its inventor before the paint was dry on the first building, and that is now used in over 100 languages, understood in conversations about travel on every inhabited continent. Chapter 10. The word that got away, and the road that remains. Motel. The combination of motor and hotel that Heineman invented and the world adopted without asking his permission. The word traveled faster than any building could. Within a decade of the Milestone Mo-Tel's opening, motel was the standard term for the kind of motor accommodation that tourist courts had been groping toward. Within 2 decades, it was in dictionaries. Within 3, it was international. Today, it appears in French, German, Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, Mandarin, and dozens of other languages, almost always in a form that recognizably descends from Heinemann's 1925 portmanteau. He invented a word used by billions of people. He received essentially no economic benefit from this. His most durable legacy is linguistic, more lasting than any building, more traveled than any road. The motel's specific contribution to American travel history was democratization. It made the road genuinely accessible to a middle class that could not have afforded to travel in any previous era. Not equally accessible, the Green Book exists as a permanent reminder that the road's democracy was conditional and partial for millions of Americans whose travel required navigating a different and more dangerous set of calculations, but substantially more accessible than what had come before. The hotel had required performance. You dressed for its lobby. Your bags were handled by its staff. You were observed arriving and assessed. The motel required nothing of this. You drove up. You paid. You slept. The anonymity that made the motel appealing to families on a budget also made it appealing for other reasons. And the motel's cultural reputation carries both the warmth of road trip nostalgia and the shadow of what that anonymity also enabled. Both are part of the same story. Chapter 11. One word. 61,000 buildings and the road. Arthur Heineman names a thing that is already forming along the American highway. The name escapes him. The thing grows. 13,000 tourist courts by 1939. 30,000 motels by 1954. 61,000 by 1958. Kemmons-Wilson standardizes it. The interstate reroutes it. The chains win the competitive battle. The airlines take the long-distance travelers. The surviving independent motels become nostalgia for themselves. What remains, besides the word and the surviving buildings, is the memory. If you are over 50, you took road trips before the algorithm decided where you would stay. You made the motel decision at speed. You looked at the sign. You assessed the parking lot. You checked whether the pool looked maintained. You made a call based on instinct and fatigue, and whatever your family could agree on in the 30 seconds you had before the decision point passed. Sometimes you got it wrong. Sometimes you pulled into a room that smelled like the previous guest's cigarettes, and the air conditioner rattled all night, and the pool was closed for maintenance. Sometimes you pulled into a room that was perfectly clean, and the pool was exactly the right temperature, and the family stayed in the water until the sun went down, and it was, for reasons you cannot fully articulate, one of the best nights of the trip. The algorithm that now makes those decisions for you is more efficient. It produces a better average outcome by almost every measurable standard. The rooms are more consistently clean. The prices are more predictable. The amenities are more reliably what they were advertised to be. But it doesn't produce the story. Arthur Heineman's word is still out there, on signs at interstate exits and along the surviving stretches of the old American road. 61,000 properties at the peak. one word at the beginning, and somewhere in between the particular pleasure of not knowing what was behind the office door until you opened it. That is the motel. If you want to know about the highway that rerouted its customers, the zoning laws that separated its parking lots from the neighborhoods around it, the garage that changed how Americans arrived home, and the ranch house they arrived home to, every one of those episodes is already in this series. Subscribe so you see what comes next. Leave a comment with the best or worst motel memory you have, and share this with someone who still has a key fob in a junk drawer somewhere.